Hi, and welcome to Stamp with Ginny. Today I'm going to share with you how I made this lovely notebook holder that holds this notepad using the Quite Curvy Bundle of products from the 2021 January-June mini catalog. This stamp set has a coordinating set of dies that allows you to create this beautiful edge along with the images that'll tuck into the curves. So let me set this aside and I'll show you how I got started. Before I start stamping, I am going to use my Stampin' Cut and Emboss to cut the shape onto my piece of Whisper White cardstock. I'm going to place my Whisper White cardstock on my cutting pad, and then I'm going to bring in this little swoop die. I'm going to set it along the edge here, and I want to leave a pretty good amount here on the one side. I'm going to place my cutting mat on top, being careful not to have that move, and then I'm going to run it through my cut and emboss machine. Okay, I'm going to remove that cutting plate, and then I'm going to lift this up. Now, as you can see, this only does part of the cardstock, and so I'm going to slide this up, and I'm going to keep this in the same orientation because the cutting is right here on this edge. I hope you can see that cutting blade, and I need that to be on the same side. So I am going to start that simply by setting it where I think it should go. You can line up the circles if you want to kind of give you a guideline. You're going to be okay if this is not perfect, because when we put it together we will be creating a focal point that goes over this. Now, to keep my cutting piece in place, I'm going to put a little piece of washi tape on there, and I am going to run this through my Stampin' Cut and Emboss a second time. That's going to cut the last portion of your paper. Now, you might want to try a practice run of this. It is a little tricky the first time you do it, and once you have it, then you should be able to do it again and again. Okay, I'm going to lift that up. Now, as you can see, I have a slight little line over there, and that's okay. That section where the cardstock did not cut through completely, I can simply take my paper snips and snip and clean that up. So I've got my curvy side done, and I have the scrap piece of Whisper White paper that I'm going to use for my stamping. So let me show you the next step. I'm going to start with my little birds. I'm going to do 2 of these here, and I'm going to give myself plenty of room around them. I'm going to do the one that's singing, and then the one that's sitting facing the one that will be singing. I'm going to color those with the blends, but I'll set that aside for now. And then I'm going to bring in this lovely vine stamp. Now, I really love these leaves. I think they're really quite cool the way they curve with the die, and it makes this set really unique. So I am going to take my vine and I am going to stamp this first in the center, following that die, 1, 2, 3, and then I'm going to turn this a little bit so that you can see. I'm going to follow that vine first on this side. I'm going to leave a little bit of a gap between the 2 images. I'm not going to bother trying to line that up. I think it'll be fine. And then I'm going to put some leaves here at the top with the other end of the image, leaving that little gap again. Okay, so now that I've got my vines done, I can set that aside and bring in a piece of Whisper White cardstock. Now, I'm going to be using my Tasteful Label dies to cut this out, so I want to make sure I've got plenty of room. 1, 2, 3, and I've got my sentiment. On to the coloring. I'm going to start with my Balmy Blue and my little birds. I am going to use my fine tip pen for this, and I am simply going to outline my birds on the top here, this top feather area, and I'm going to add a little extra color there under his wing just to make that a little darker and give it a little shading. And then I'm going to come down on this bird and I'm going to do the top of his body also, his head, and then his wing. And once again, I'm going to add a few more layers of color underneath that wing portion where it's divided to give some definition. I'm going to bring in my light Balmy Blue then and simply color his little body. And on this one, I'm going to do the top and the bottom. And as you can see, I'm not doing a lot of shading. I'm just doing straight coloring. Although you can add a second layer of color, which is the wonderful thing about our blends, and get a deeper shade of the color you're working with. Now for the vines. I'm using my soft sea foam and my mint macaron for this, and I am going to start with the light soft sea foam. I'm going to use the flare tip end because I'm going to be doing this quickly and easily. I'm going to color some of these randomly with the light sea foam, just picking out some that are on the top and running randomly down this image along the cut edge. I just love the way we can blend and use these together. And of course, if you make a oops, you've got your color lifter to push that color back in place, which is fantastic. It really makes this foolproof. Let's see, I'm going to make this one here light also. I'm not really doing it in a specific order, I'm just doing it randomly. At that point, I'm going to bring in my soft sea foam dark, and I'm simply going to add some color to the bottom of those leaves, adding a little bit of shading. As you can see, I'm just moving quickly. I'm using the bullet point for this, but if you prefer, you could use the flare tip also. I think I forgot that one, so we'll add a little shading there. The next thing I'm going to do is bring in my light mint macaron, and I'm going to do some of the leaves randomly in that. I've got my light macaron done, and I'm going to bring in the dark macaron and quickly do some leaves in that. I'm also going to do this little vine here between, and even hit the little squiggly a bit. I'm doing this randomly, just adding color to here and there. Along with this little vine. Okay, now if I want, I can come back on my light mint, and I can add some shading on that also. But I don't need to add a whole lot. It's not really necessary. But I can do it just to add a little bit of color. Now I like to come back when I'm doing that with my light and go over those areas just to blend them a little bit, because this is a little more dramatic. There we go. Okay, now I'm ready for my dark sea foam, and I'm going to use that to shade the rest of these leaves. And since I'm using the dark, I'm going to add a little more color by adding a second layer around the areas that I want. Moving randomly along the images, filling in those leaves that I didn't get to. And of course, at this point, if you want, you can add a little more shading to your leaves if you'd like to. There we go, quick and easy. And now I am ready to cut out my items. I'm going to use my little bird dies here from the Curvy Dies to cut out my birds, and then I'm going to use this lovely label here for the sentiment from the Tasteful Labels dies. I'm going to run this through the cut and emboss quickly, but I wanted to let you know that I do have a companion video that will share how to cut these tiny dies out quickly, easily, and consistently. So let me get that done, and I'll show you how to assemble. The easiest way I found to do this was to take the mint macaron mat and flip over my panel here. Then I found if I ran a little bit of adhesive down the edge here, it gave me my basic adhering area. I'm using the liquid because I want to be able to move this, but you can use our Stamp and Seal Plus also. I'm going to lay down this panel here, and by doing this upside down, it allows me to see where I'm working. Okay, I've got that in place, and I have it adjusted the way I want it, making sure that my edges are nice and straight. And then I'm going to add a little bit of adhesive here along the bottom edge. Now this next piece is cut a little large so that I have some wiggle room. So once again, I'm going to hold this in place, and I'm going to line this up with both the top and the far edge here, making sure that they're straight. Now it's going to overlap a little bit here, but that's okay. That gives us a little bit of room. And because I'm using my liquid adhesive, I can actually pick this up and tap to make sure that edge is nice and tight. Okay, as you can see, that's in place. My sentiment here is going to cover that line, so I'm not real worried. I'm ready to add this to my mat. Adding a lot of adhesive so that it's nice and firm, since this is a 3D item, and I'm going to adhere that in place. I'm going to bring in my sentiment now, and as you can see, that's going to cover that with no problems. I'm also going to bring in these little vine images and the two birds that I've cut out using the dies. I've done this in mint and soft sea foam so that I'm matching my color scheme here. So the first thing I want to do is kind of lay these out the way I want them. I do plan on cutting them a little bit so that they're not all the same length and they can hang over where I want them. I think I'm going to actually add a little bit on the back side there. So I am going to snip this off, about here, and then add a little adhesive. You can use your fine tip glue pen also for this if you would like, and I'm going to tack that right there about where I think it's going to go with my sentiment. This line here where the two pieces of designer series paper kind of gives you a guide of where you're going to be putting that. And then I'm going to bring in my dark here, and I am going to snip off that little end, and I'm going to tack that down once again. Now, of course, our multi-purpose adhesive sheets would make this really quick and easy if you'd like to use those when you're cutting them out. There we go. I've got my mint adhered down and my soft sea foam, and I'm going to lay my sentiment here on top of it so that I can add some adhesive to the back of this next one and lay it on top. I'm going to run that right along the edge here and then trim. Oops. I'm going to leave that a little long so that the bird has a little perch that it can sit on. I'm going to add my birds first before I add the dimensionals to the back so that I can add them all together. So there we go. I'm going to add my little bird, and I'm just adding a little bit of adhesive here to tack him in place where I want him. And same thing with my bird on the top left-hand corner. There we go. And I need to allow that to dry, and then I'm ready to flip it over and add my dimensionals. Now, because I did everything together, I can use my dimensionals to hold things also in place. Sorry, got a little adhesive on my fingers now. There we go. I'm using the small ones because I want to be able to tuck them right up into that area, and then I can bring some of my larger dimensionals and add them to the four corners. And for good measure, I'm going to add a couple on the center because I want this nice and secure and I want it to stay popped up. I'm going to remove my backings here. And then I am ready to add this to the front of my project as I desire. I'm going to slide him over a little bit. There we go, making sure it's nice and straight. Okay, now I can show you how we're going to make the notepad and score the folder for it. To create the folder, we are going to take our basic gray cardstock here and lay it on your Simply scoreboard. I'm going to score at the 5 1/8 inch mark and then the 5 3/8 inch mark. and I'm ready to set this aside. I'm going to fold on these 2 score lines and use my bone folder so that it's a nice tight crease. Okay, I'm going to try my 5 by 8 inch notepad in the center here. Make sure it closes the way I'd like to. I like that, so I'm ready to decorate my notepad. I'm going to bring in a piece of Mint Macaron Coordinating Designer Series paper, and I'm going to be using our tear and tape for this project. I'm going to add a piece of tear and tape here on the very bottom of my notepad, and as you can see I'm covering this so the color of the notepad doesn't matter. And then I'm going to decide which side I want up, and I'm going to add a piece of tear tape across the bottom edge of the back side. And what this is going to do is give me a adhering area on the front and the back, and so I'm ready to pull off those protective strips. You can do these both at one time if you'd like, or you can do them one at a time. That's up to you. I'm going to do both while I've got it here. Okay, now I'm going to take that area without the tear and tape, and I'm going to lay this down along the edge of my notepad. There we go. And then I'm going to take my fingers and I'm going to wrap this around the top edge, creasing it as I go. I'm going to pull this down nice and tight and then adhere onto the back. And you can even use your bone folder here to make that nice and sharp, and also to burnish that tear and tape so it stays in place well. Now I'm ready to adhere it inside my notepad folder. I'm using my multi-purpose, but you can also use the tear and tape for this. The choice is yours. Make sure you can see where the lines are, and then adhere down. And I want to do this so that there's a little bit of a margin showing all the way around. If you're using the liquid, you can reposition if you need to. There we go. I'm going to allow that to dry, and while that's drying, I'm going to bring in the front panel that we did, and I'm going to adhere this in place. I'm adding plenty of adhesive so that it's nice and it will hold. There we go. Okay, I've got the outside of my notebook done, and I'm ready to move on to the inside. Okay, I am going to bring in my Whisper White cardstock here. I've added these little Post-it notes and then some flags that I found in my local dollar spot. And I've set these on the Whisper White cardstock just for placement so that I know where I want to stamp. At this point, I am going to bring in my floral image here that also has this fun curve to it, and I am going to stamp it right down in the center of my cardstock. And at this point, if you wanted, you could move your Post-it notepad so that you have better room for your block, but I think I'm going to be okay with this. So I am going to ink up your 1 in a million, and I'm going to center it on that floral swag, and I am going to stamp. Now if I wanted, I could add some more going off of the cardstock, but I think that pop of color is just fine by itself. At this point, I'm going to bring in my Petal Pink and my Mint Macaron blends. I'm going to remove my Post-its and my flags, and I'm going to start coloring. I'm going to bring in the dark Petal Pink, and I'm going to add a little bit of color along the base here and the petals. And I'm just going to choose a little bit of variety in where I'm putting that dark color. It doesn't have to be consistent or perfect. I just want to add a little pop of color here. And then I'm going to add in my Petal Pink Light, and I'm going to finish the flowers. And I'm going over that dark just to kind of smooth in things. And of course, if you go out of the lines, you can use your color lifter to pull that color back in, and you can fix the problems that you have. I'm now going to bring in my Mint Macaron, and I'm going to use the small tip for this. I'm going to use it here on my leaves, and I'm going to just do a variety again. I'm not doing anything specific as far as a pattern, and I'm also going to do the stem of the flowers with the dark, so that pops. I'm going to go all the way down my swag here until the last flower. I think I'm going to make that dark also. And you can even go over the curlicues if you want. And then I'm going to bring in my light, and I'm going to do the other petal, or the leaves I should say, in the light. And you can do those swirlies like I mentioned if you want. And then I'm going to add the light to these little leaves also. And you can go over the stem with the blends just to add a little color. And there we go. Okay, I've got my coloring done real quick and easy, and I'm ready to mount this onto my mat. I'm going to take my adhesive and adhere that onto the Mint Macaron, just centering it. Now I'm using heavy mats for this project because I want to make sure that I have got a nice stiff cover for my notebook. And at this point I can take my Post-its and adhere. You'll want to use a nice strong adhesive, either your tear and tape or your Stampin' Seal Plus, or the liquid here that I'm using. There we go. I just thought this was cute with the stamp. Don't forget you're 1 in a million. And then I'm going to make sure my flags are nice and clean on the edges, and I'm going to add that to the bottom here. I'm adding the mint one that I found in the middle. Don't you love how our colors are also found in the stores on products so that we can coordinate things together? And I'm going to add the final pad here, removing this excess. Don't need that sticking on there. Sometimes the cardboard doesn't come off as clean. And then add that, spacing it out evenly on the left side. There we go. Now that I have my flags attached, I'm ready to bring my notebook back in. And once again, you want to use a strong adhesive for this because it is heavy with the notepads and flags on it. And I'm going to add some adhesive here and attach it to the right hand inside cover. There we go. I think that's lovely, and they'll enjoy this little gift. So if you'd like any of these products, feel free to stop by my online store. You can get there from my blog, Stamp with Ginny. Thanks for joining me.